A shattered bone. A desperate text typed through tears meant for a mother who lived 3 states away. Instead of the police, the reply came from an unknown number. I am not your mother, but I am on my way. Within 10 minutes, the monsters of the night answered her plea. The rain was lashing against the windows of the 4th-floor Capitol Hill apartment, but the sound of the storm was nothing compared to the deafening roar of Wyatt's anger. Harper Bennett backed into the hallway, her palms pressed flat against the cool drywall. At 24, she was a successful freelance illustrator, someone who built beautiful, colorful worlds for a living. But her reality was painted in suffocating shades of gray, trapped in a lease and a relationship with Wyatt Henderson. Wyatt, a senior account executive at a logistics firm, was charming to the outside world, a man who bought rounds of drinks for his friends and remembered everyone's birthdays. Behind closed doors, he was a ticking time bomb, and tonight the timer had hit 0. It started over a mislaid set of car keys. It escalated when Wyatt noticed a text message on Harper's locked screen from her client, a man named Arthur, asking about a deadline. By the time Wyatt cornered her in the narrow hallway, his eyes were wide, the veins in his neck bulging against his starched white collar. You think I'm stupid, Harper? Wyatt hissed his voice, dropping to a dangerous low decibel that always preceded violence. You think I don't know what you're doing behind my back? Wyatt, please, he's just the art director for the campaign. Harper pleaded, her voice trembling. I haven't even met him in person. He didn't listen. He never did when the red haze descended over his vision. Wyatt lunged. Harper threw up her arms in a desperate instinctual bid to protect her face. Wyatt's heavy hands clamped down on her left forearm. He didn't just grab her. He twisted, putting his entire body weight into a violent downward wrench. The sound was sickening. It wasn't just a pop. It was a wet, resonant crack that echoed off the hardwood floors. For a split second, Harper didn't feel anything. Her brain simply couldn't process the catastrophic structural failure of her own anatomy. Then the fire ignited. It shot up her arm, a blinding, agonizing flare of white-hot pain that buckled her knees. She screamed a raw, ragged sound that tore at her throat. Her left forearm hung at a grotesque, unnatural angle, a sharp protrusion pressing dangerously against the pale skin from the inside. Wyatt stepped back, his chest heaving, his expression flickering from feral rage to sudden cowardly panic. Look what you made me do, he stammered, pointing a shaking finger at her. If you had just told the truth. Harper didn't wait to hear the rest of his gaslighting. Adrenaline, cold and sharp, flooded her system. Cradling her mangled arm against her chest, she scrambled backward, kicking out wildly as she pushed herself across the floor. She made it to the master bathroom, hauling herself inside and slamming the heavy oak door shut. She fumbled with her good hand, locking the deadbolt just a fraction of a second before Wyatt's shoulder slammed against the wood from the outside. Open the door, Harper. Wyatt roared, the panic gone, replaced by a desperate need to control the narrative. We need to go to the hospital, but we need to get our story straight first. You fell. You tripped over the rug. Harper collapsed against the bathtub, her breathing coming in shallow, hyperventilating gasps. Black spots danced at the edges of her vision. The pain was absolute, making her nauseous. She was trapped. Wyatt would break the door down, and if she didn't agree to lie to the doctors, he would finish what he started. With trembling, blood-slicked fingers, she had bitten her own lip hard enough to bleed during the break. She dug into her back pocket and pulled out her phone. The screen was cracked, but it illuminated the dark bathroom. She needed her mother. Linda Bennett lived in Portland 3 hours away, but she would know what to do. She would call the Seattle police. She would send help. Harper's vision blurred with fresh tears as she rapidly typed the number from memory. Area code 503. But in her shock-induced tremor, her thumb slipped. She hit the 4 instead of the 3. Area code 504. A New Orleans code, or somewhere else, entirely routed through the labyrinth of modern cellular networks. She didn't notice. She couldn't notice. She tapped out a frantic, desperate message, ignoring the typos. "Mom, please." Wyatt lost it. He broke my arm. I'm locked in the bathroom, and he is trying to break the door down. I think he's going to kill me. "Help me." She hit send. Outside, the pounding stopped. Wyatt was breathing heavily against the door. "I'm going to the kitchen to get the hammer." "Harper," he said, his voice terrifyingly calm now. "If this door isn't unlocked when I get back, I'm taking it off the hinges, and you're going to regret making me do it." His footsteps retreated down the hall. Harper squeezed her eyes shut, sobbing into her knees, cradling her ruined arm. She waited for the notification. Her mother was a light sleeper. She would reply immediately. Ding. The phone vibrated in her palm. Harper gasped, wiping her eyes to read the screen through the gloom. But the contact name didn't say Mom. It was a string of digits she didn't recognize, and the message wasn't from a panicked mother in Portland. "I am not your mother." Harper's blood ran cold. The phone slipped slightly in her sweaty grip. A wrong number. She had sent her desperate final plea to a stranger. She was entirely alone. Wyatt's heavy footsteps were already echoing back down the hallway. Before she could even process the despair, 3 little typing dots appeared on the screen. A second later, another message arrived. "But I am on my way. Do not leave the room. Close your eyes." Harper stared at the glowing screen. It was an impossible message. Who was this? How could they be on their way? They didn't even have her address. The GPS location data on her phone was on, but a civilian couldn't track an iMessage that fast. It had to be a cruel joke, a prank, by some bored stranger sitting hundreds of miles away. "Time's up, Harper," Wyatt sang out from the hallway. Crack. The head of a claw hammer smashed through the center panel of the bathroom door, sending wooden splinters flying across the tile floor. Harper screamed, pressing herself deeper into the corner between the toilet and the bathtub. Crack. Another hole appeared. Wyatt reached his hand through the jagged splinters, blindly grasping for the deadbolt on the inside. Harper watched in absolute terror as his fingers found the metal latch. He turned it. The door began to slowly swing open. Wyatt stepped into the doorway, the hammer gripped tightly in his right hand. His face was a mask of furious, terrifying resolve. "I told you not to make me—" Wyatt never finished his sentence. The transition from a domestic nightmare to something entirely otherworldly happened in less than a second. One moment Wyatt was standing in the doorway raising the hammer. The next, the ambient noise of the Seattle rain, the hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen, even the sound of Wyatt's breathing, it all vanished. A heavy, unnatural silence slammed down over the apartment, thick as deep water. The air temperature plummeted, frost instantly blooming across the bathroom mirror. Wyatt froze. His eyes darted away from Harper and looked over his shoulder down the dark hallway. "Who the hell are you?" he demanded, raising the hammer toward an intruder Harper couldn't see. "How did you get in here?" The voice that answered did not belong to a human being. It was impossibly smooth, resonant, and coated in a predatory aristocratic cadence that made the hairs on Harper's arms stand at attention. A plea was issued. The voice said, soft but vibrating with lethal intent. It resonated through the grid, a broken bird crying out for its mother. Unfortunately for you, it reached my domain instead. "I'm calling the cops," Wyatt yelled, taking a step backward into the bathroom, retreating from whatever was in the hall. "They would be far too slow," the shadow replied. What happened next was a blur of violence, so fast, Harper's human eyes could barely track it. A blur of movement shot down the hallway, a hand pale and elegant wrapped around Wyatt's throat. Wyatt, a man who weighed 200 pounds and spent 3 days a week at the gym, was lifted off his feet with zero effort. The hammer fell from his grip, clattering uselessly against the bathroom tiles. Wyatt began to kick his hands, clawing at the vice-like grip on his neck. He tried to scream, but the pressure crushed his vocal cords, resulting in a pathetic, wet, gurgling sound. The figure holding him stepped fully into the dim light spilling from the bathroom vanity. Harper stopped breathing. The man was terrifyingly beautiful. He wore a bespoke charcoal grey suit that looked like it cost more than Harper made in a year tailored perfectly to a broad-shouldered, lean physique. His raven hair was slicked back, untouched by the Seattle rain, but it was his face that paralyzed her. High, aristocratic cheekbones, a sharp jawline, and skin that was pale and flawless, resembling polished marble. And his eyes. They were not human. The irises were a glowing, luminescent crimson, burning like twin dying stars in the shadowed apartment. Alistair Covington did not blink as he watched Wyatt struggle. He tilted his head slightly, a look of mild disgust crossing his perfect features. "You snap the bones of those smaller than you," Alistair whispered, his voice echoing in Wyatt's mind as much as in the room. "Let us see how you appreciate the sensation." Alistair didn't use a weapon. He didn't even drop Wyatt. With his free hand, he reached out and took hold of Wyatt's right arm, the same arm that had wielded the hammer. With a sickeningly casual flick of his wrist, Alistair snapped Wyatt's forearm completely in half. Wyatt's eyes bulged, blood vessels bursting in his sclera, as a muted, choked scream tore through his crushed throat. "Pathetic," Alistair murmured. He tossed Wyatt backward like a discarded rag doll. Wyatt's body slammed into the far wall of the living room with the force of a car crash, shattering the plaster and leaving him in a crumpled, unmoving heap on the floor. Whether he was dead or merely unconscious, Harper couldn't tell, and she was too terrified to care. The silence returned. The monster in the bespoke suit slowly turned around, facing the bathroom. Harper pressed herself into the corner, shaking uncontrollably, her broken arm clutched to her chest. She had traded a human abuser for an apex predator. This was it. She was going to die here, trapped in a bloody bathroom. Alistair stepped through the shattered doorway. The sharp wooden splinters seemed to part for him, not daring to snag the expensive wool of his trousers. As he looked down at her, the terrifying crimson glow in his eyes slowly receded, bleeding away into a deep, rich mahogany brown. The predatory sneer faded, replaced by an expression of profound, almost sorrowful gentleness. He knelt on the floor, ignoring the blood and dirt, bringing himself down to her eye level. "Do not be afraid, little bird," Alistair said, his voice now a soothing, velvet baritone. "The brute will never lay a hand on you again. I am Alistair Covington, and you are safe. You got my text," Harper whispered, her voice cracking her mind, struggling to bridge the gap between reality and the supernatural nightmare unfolding before her. "How? My network intercepts many things in this city," Alistair replied, softly, slowly reaching out a hand. He stopped inches from her. He was waiting for permission. "When an absolute cry for sanctuary crosses my wires, I listen, especially when the pain is so vibrant it practically screams through the digital code." Harper looked at his hand, then up at his face. She was in agony, her body going into shock, but there was an undeniable magnetic pull radiating from him. A supernatural aura of calm that commanded her panic to subside. "My arm," she sobbed, the pain finally breaking through the adrenaline. "It's broken." "I know," Alistair said. He gently moved closer. "May I?" Harper nodded weakly. Alistair moved with impossible care. He supported her elbow with one cool, firm hand and rested his other hand over the grotesque lump where the bone was pressing against her skin. "This will be uncomfortable for exactly 1 second. You must trust me." Before Harper could brace herself, Alistair's grip tightened. With a sharp, practiced movement, he snapped the bones back into alignment. Harper screamed, arching her back, but before the scream could fully leave her lips, Alistair brought his own wrist to his mouth. His incisors suddenly elongated, and razor-sharp pierced his own skin. A drop of impossibly thick, iridescent ruby blood welled up. He pressed his bleeding wrist against Harper's parted lips. "Drink. Just a drop." Instinctively she swallowed. The blood tasted like liquid copper mixed with electric fire. It slid down her throat, and immediately the world exploded into focus. A wave of heat rushed from her chest down her left arm. The agonizing, blinding pain vanished entirely, replaced by a deep, intense itching sensation beneath her skin that lasted for 3 seconds before fading away. Harper gasped, pulling her arm out of Alistair's grip. She stared at it. The swelling was gone. The grotesque angle was gone. She flexed her fingers. No pain. Nothing. The bone had completely knitted itself back together. She looked up at Alistair, her eyes wide with absolute disbelief. What are you?" Alistair smiled, a small, genuinely warm expression that didn't quite reach the immortal weariness in his eyes. He stood up, offering her a hand. "I am the king of this city's shadows, Harper Bennett," he said, using her name without her having offered it. "And you are coming with me. This apartment is no longer fit for you." Harper looked past him into the living room, where Wyatt lay motionless in the dark. She looked back at the impossibly handsome, terrifying savior standing in her bathroom. He wasn't giving her a choice, but for the first time in her life, surrender felt exactly like salvation. She placed her small, healed hand into his cold one. The ride from the Capitol Hill apartment was a blur of seamless, velvet-lined luxury. Alistair's vehicle, a matte black luxury SUV with tinted windows that seemed to absorb the city lights rather than reflect them, glided through the rainy streets as if propelled by a ghost. Harper sat in the back, the smell of expensive leather and something metallic like ozone and old books clinging to the air. "Where are we going?" Harper asked, her voice barely a whisper. She looked at her arm, which still felt a faint, phantom tingle where the break had been. It was perfectly straight. Alistair sat beside her, his posture relaxed, his hands folded over a leather-bound journal. He didn't look at her, but she felt his focus, centered entirely on her. "To a place where the noise of the world cannot reach you, Harper. The Covington estate is hidden, not by walls, but by design. You are safe there. My security detail has already scrubbed your digital footprint. Wyatt Henderson will wake up in a holding cell with no memory of how he got there, and your apartment will be empty by dawn." "You can't just make people disappear," Harper protested, though her heart wasn't in it. Alistair turned his head, his dark, human-like eyes searching hers. "In this city, I can make reality itself bend. You asked for help. You didn't ask for a legal battle that would leave you scarred for life. You asked to be saved." As they pulled through a massive iron-wrought gate that seemed to materialize out of the dense fog of the Pacific Northwest forest, Harper realized the scale of her situation. The house was a sprawling manor of Gothic stone and glass perched on a cliff overlooking the churning dark waters of the Puget Sound. It was a masterpiece of architecture, ancient yet impossibly modern, glowing with warm amber lights that invited her in like a beacon. Inside the house was a labyrinth of marble hallways, grand staircases, and silent, watchful staff who moved with a grace that bordered on the ethereal. Alistair led her to a suite that felt less like a room and more like a sanctuary. It was filled with fresh jasmine, soft textures, and a massive floor-to-ceiling window that looked out over the endless crashing waves. "This is your home now," Alistair said, leaning against the doorframe. He looked tired, a heavy, ancient exhaustion that made her feel a strange, sudden empathy for him. "For as long as you need." "Why?" Harper asked, standing in the center of the room. "Why go to all this trouble for a girl who just dialed the wrong number?" Alistair went quiet. He stepped into the room, his movements fluid and soundless. He stopped just feet away, his gaze intense. "In my centuries of existing, I have found that the most significant threads of destiny are often woven from mistakes. You were meant to call your mother. Instead you called a king. Perhaps that was not an error, but an invitation." Over the next few weeks, Harper's life transformed into a surreal, golden existence. She wanted for nothing. She spent her days painting in a sun-drenched studio he had commissioned for her, and her evenings in long, sprawling conversations with Alistair by the library fireplace. But the drama wasn't just in the past. It lived in the shadows. One evening, while Alistair was away, attending to the affairs of the city, Harper was approached in the garden by a woman named Seraphina. She was tall, with hair like spun silver, and eyes that glittered with a dangerous, icy intelligence. She moved as if she owned the very air she walked through. "You're the pet, then," Seraphina said, her voice dripping with venom. She paced around Harper, her heels clicking sharply on the stone path. "The one who summoned the king with a text message. How quaint! How pathetic!" Harper stood her ground. "I'm not a pet. I'm a guest." Seraphina laughed, a sound like glass breaking. "Alistair doesn't keep guests, girl. He keeps curiosities. He keeps things that entertain him until the boredom sets in again. And believe me, the boredom always sets in. He has lived for 300 years. What do you think you have to offer that he hasn't already tasted 1,000 times?" "He saved my life," Harper said, though her voice shook. "He played hero," Seraphina countered, stepping into Harper's personal space. Her skin was unnaturally cold, radiating a chilling aura that made Harper shiver. "He thrives on being needed. It feeds his vanity. But when you become a liability, when the human world starts sniffing around the trail he left, he will dispose of you as easily as he disposed of that man in the bathroom." "Get out of the garden!" a voice boomed, deep and resonant. Alistair stood at the entrance of the pergola, his silhouette framed by the dying light of the sun. He looked furious, a dark energy crackling around him. Seraphina didn't flinch, but she smiled a thin, cruel line. "I was just welcoming the new addition, Alistair," she purred, bowing her head mockingly, before slipping past him into the shadows. Alistair strode toward Harper, his expression softening the moment his eyes landed on her. "Did she hurt you?" "No," Harper said, looking at him with searching eyes. "But she said I'm just a hobby to you. Is she right, Alistair? Am I just a temporary distraction?" Alistair looked toward the horizon, where the sun was dipping below the sea. "Seraphina is a creature of malice, Harper. She cannot understand what she does not possess. And she cannot understand why for the first time in an epoch I have found myself anchored." He walked over to her, taking her face in his hands. His thumbs traced her cheekbones, his touch warmer than the night air. "You are not a hobby. You are the first thing in this long, cold life that has made me want to wake up before the sun sets." The peace did not last. A week later, the news hit the mainstream. Wyatt Henderson hadn't stayed gone. He had surfaced, claiming to have been kidnapped by a group of masked men, his arm showing signs of anomalous, rapid-onset healing that the media was calling a medical miracle. He was back, and he was hunting for Harper. He didn't know about the supernatural, but he knew about Alistair. He had seen enough on that final night to know that the man who saved Harper wasn't human. He had teamed up with private investigators and eventually people who knew what to look for people who dealt in occult secrets. The estate came under siege, not with guns, but with symbols, traps, and entities that hunted in the dark. "He's brought them to our door, hasn't he?" Harper whispered, standing in the library, as Alistair prepared for a war she could barely comprehend. "He is a fool," Alistair said, his voice calm but cold. He was dressed in a tactical dark ensemble, his eyes glowing with that same lethal crimson intensity she remembered from the night they met. "He thinks he can use mortal laws to cage a predator. He thinks he can use their petty magic to bind me. Why doesn't he just stop?" Harper asked, tears stinging her eyes. "Because he is obsessed, and obsession is the most dangerous human trait," Alistair said. He turned to her, his gaze intense. "Harper, you must stay behind the protective wards of the library. If you step outside, you will be hunted. He is coming for you, not me." "I don't want to hide anymore," Harper cried. "I spent my life hiding from him, and now I'm hiding from him again. I want to end this." Alistair stepped to her, his movements a blur of grace. He stopped her with a gentle yet firm kiss, cold, sweet, and lingering. "Then stay close to me. We will end this together." The final confrontation took place in the grand hall of the estate, under the light of a blood-red moon. Wyatt Gaunt, and eyes wide with a frantic, manic energy, burst through the front doors, backed by a team of mercenaries carrying strange, glowing canisters of silver nitrate. "Give her back," Wyatt screamed, the sound echoing through the cavernous hall. "She's mine. She's my property." Alistair didn't move. He stood at the top of the grand staircase, his hands behind his back. "She is a sovereign soul, Henderson, and you are a speck of dust in the wind." The mercenaries fired. The silver mist filled the room, acidic and burning. Harper watched in terror as Alistair walked through it, the substance sizzling against his skin, but failing to slow him down. He moved with a speed that defied physics, closing the distance between him and Wyatt in a single heartbeat. Wyatt tried to raise a weapon, but Alistair caught his wrist, the sound of bone snapping, echoing once again in the hall. "This is the end of your story," Alistair whispered, his voice vibrating with power. "He didn't kill him. He did something much worse." He placed his hand on Wyatt's forehead, and with a flash of light, he reached into the man's mind, tearing away every memory, every ambition, every scrap of identity that Wyatt possessed. He left him as a blank slate, a hollow shell of a man wandering out into the night with no name, no past, and no ability to ever hurt another soul again. The mercenaries fled, terrified by the display of godlike power. Silence returned to the estate. Harper walked down the stairs, her feet steady, her heart finally quiet. She stood before Alistair, who looked down at her with a mix of triumph and tenderness. "It's over," he said. "What now?" she asked. Alistair reached out, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "Now the world continues to turn, and we continue to exist. But I no longer have to live in the shadows alone. If you choose this life, Harper, the life of a queen of the night, it comes with burdens. But it also comes with forever." Harper looked at the man who had answered a wrong number text and changed the trajectory of her soul. She took his hand, her grip firm and certain. "I've been waiting for my life to begin," she said. "I think I'm finally ready." The storm outside had cleared. The moon shone bright over the dark, churning water, and for the first time, Harper didn't fear the dark. She stood beside her king, ready to embrace the eternity they were destined to share. The line between a tragic ending and a legendary beginning is often just one small, desperate choice. Harper Bennett found her salvation not in the person she reached out to, but in the destiny that chose her back. Her story reminds us that even in our darkest moments, there is a path forward sometimes, to places and people we never expected. If you loved this journey into the shadows, hit that like button, share this story, and subscribe for more.